No, you're not. You get priority on the space.
Yeah,
I have to
right.
Find it where I can.
Okay, I'll call a meeting to order for the Neighbors of Dunn County, June 17th, 2021. We'll call, all are present except for Sarah Kennedy, and Chair Bartlett is also present with us. Everyone's had a chance to read the minutes, I'm sure. Are there any questions? Is there a motion to approve?
I would move to presume to
Kelly
approve
moved
the
to
minutes
approve,
as presented.
And I will second it.
and Mike seconded it. Are there any other questions or discussion on it? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye to approve.
Aye.
Against, carried. Let me see, public comment. Do we have any public comment? Anyone know? No, nothing? Okay,
There's no public comment.
thank you, Krista. We'll go into the community mentor / administrator report, please. Carmen.
All right, the first item on there is the audit. So I will hand that over to April from Clifton, Larson and Allen to discuss that.
Good morning, everyone. Can you hear me okay? Okay, good. So yes, I'm here to talk over the NDC audit for 2020. And you should have available to you the one-page summary that we generally go over. And then hopefully you do have the actual full audit report available to you as well. But as I said, we generally just go over the 10-page high-level summary as far as the key pieces of information that we feel it's necessary for you to know as the board and committee for NDC. So in the 10-page summary, if you did look at it, you'll see that there were some big changes going on this year, but that really shouldn't have been a complete surprise to you as far as knowing the activity that was done in 2020. And so what we will go over there, as I said, it's a 10-year summary, so you can kind of see how things have trended over the last few years here. And when we start at the top of that summary, we are starting with the balance sheet, and I will not go over every line. But one thing we like to point out in that section is for your assets, the top section. You have operating cash there, and you'll see that that has been zero for most of the years over the last 10-year period. The 1 year you did have some cash available, but that was because of the land sale, and then it was going to be used in the subsequent years. So that's why you had that, but otherwise you haven't had any true operating cash available at NDC. Then what else we see in the asset section, the top section there, is not too big of changes really in this section. It's kind of more in the next section, the liabilities, where we see more changes. But here we did pull information out a little differently this year to try to show you the effect that some of the GASB standards have on your financial statements. And so there you'll see, if you're comparing to last year's summary or anything like that, we did show a net change for the Wisconsin Retirement GASB 68 change. And then in the liability section, we have something for your OPEB. So we were just trying to, because it can have a big impact on your financial statements, we were just trying to show that and break it out because it's not really from true operational measures. It's because of how you need to account for certain things. So just wanted to point that out, that you'll see some bigger fluctuations in there. And as I said, we tried to pull that out. And when we get to the actual operational results for the year, you'll see how we pull that out too at the bottom. But then as we continue down into the liability section, the second section there, this is where you're going to see bigger changes, because in 2020, you kind of restructured how the debt was being accounted for the new building from 2013 when that debt was issued. And so in this section, you'll see the interest payable got wiped out because that again moved into the general county reporting. And then the due to other funds was also wiped out, because why that due to other funds has really grown over the last few years or multiple years is because of the building project and the debt requirements that were made annually for principal and interest. So each year NDC up till 2020 was paying that principal and interest, and it really didn't have the cash or available funds to do so. And so it was relying, NDC was relying really on county levy to pay that principal and interest, or to kind of loan NDC money to pay the principal and interest. So again, that's why things were kind of restructured in 2020 to show what is truly going on, and the fact that the levy is truly paying for that at this point in time. So that's where the due to other funds, then we were able with the restructuring to remove that loan to the general fund that you've had historically. Then with that overall change in the restructuring of the debt, then you'll see a few lines down where the bonds payable is completely zero as well at the end of 2020. But I did want to go back up to the other liabilities line, because that did increase quite a bit in from 2019 to 2020. It's 860,000. Just wanted to point that out, that is actually some COVID funding that you received before year end, but you didn't apply to certain expenditures. You have through June 30th to apply it. So so that's sitting out there as kind of unearned revenue at this point in time. Then as we do go down, those were kind of the key line items I wanted to point out that had major changes from previous years. But as we do get down to the bottom, then the net of your assets less your liabilities is that net position and how that's changed. And so you'll see that, again, you have a big swing, a big change from previous years, and that you had carried losses or negative net position. And then at the end of 2020, you have a positive 15 million net position. And again, that's because you have the assets for the building still carried on your balance sheet, but you don't have the related debt carried on your balance sheet. So you'll see the big change there in the net position category is the top category, the net investment in capital assets. Because again, you have the building, but you don't have the related debt that you're carrying, and that's moved over to the general county. So obviously it's kind of hard when we're working with that big of change to say, okay, how did things truly end up for 2020 then, if you take out that restructuring and that kind of odd transaction there. And so when we get to the bottom line, or the bottom section there, you'll see the income or loss from operations. And so there you can see where we've pulled out your true operational expenses and revenues and what the net of that was. And so it was a positive $787,000. And if you wanted to see the details of what kind of goes into that net, what your revenues are versus your expenditures, that would be on page 5 of the full audit report, if you want to see some of the details there. So your revenues decreased slightly, your expenditures decreased as well, just kind of due to COVID had a lot of factors there. Your cost as far as your nursing services and costs are still, that did increase just because of the need and the shortage that's out there. But due to some of the decrease in your numbers, your census numbers and that type of thing, your overall expenditures decreased. So as I said, the net is then that 787,000. So that's your true operational change for the year. And then you'll see how we broke out some of those other factors though that really got you from the deficit of 7.7 million in 2019 to the positive 15 million net position in 2020. So depreciation is factored into there. On the building, you have about $685,000 of depreciation expense each year. Then we took that change in pension and OPEB due to the accounting standards that you have to follow. and what that change impact is on your overall net position. And then the bottom two lines are new again this year with the restructuring of that debt. And so the transfer in was that overall debt amount, the principal amount, plus the interest that was paid from when the debt was issued through 2019. And so that's where the 27 million comes into play as far as the overall accumulation of that. And then the transfer back out is what you did have after that transfer of debt moved out. You did actually have positive cash or available funds to pay back some of that debt. So the 4 million transfer out is really the portion of debt then that you were able to pay back to the general county. And so then you'll see we added these last year, I believe, as far as the charts just kind of pull out that total net position and how that's changed over the last 10 years. And as I said, there's a big swing there because of that debt restructuring. And then the chart on the right shows just that income loss from operations. And again, really when you take out those other things, the depreciation expense and those other kind of non-operational expenses, things have been on the positive side where your revenues have exceeded your expenditures for operations for the last quite a few years since 2014. So that is the main kind of pieces of information that we like to share. I guess I didn't touch on the current ratio right there, which is kind of your liquidity, your current assets to your current liabilities. And if anybody recalls past years, that did include that due to the general fund. And so it was usually less than 1. But we did pull out that and try to make it comparable for all the years. So you'll see you've been right around the 2 to 3 range. So really your current assets, which includes cash, which you don't have any operating cash, but your current accounts receivable that is expected to be collected, soon after year end, is enough to pay for your current liabilities. And so that's what that means with that current ratio. Does anybody have any questions, or if Carmen or Keith want to add any additional insight as well?
Anybody have any questions? Don't hear any. Well, go ahead. We got one.
Yeah.
Okay.
So what is the actual figure that if we wouldn't have changed it, that would be due to the general fund? Would that be the 23 million or?
So so the due to other funds, if that would have been, instead of brought from the 8.2 million down to 0.
Right.
That's what you're asking? Okay.
What would it be? What would it be now?
You would have been 700. You would have almost broken even as far as if you kind of take out those transfers in and transfers out at the bottom there. It's about a $30,000 plus. And so you would have been pretty similar as far as the outstanding balance would have been on that due to other funds.
And if I could add, Mr. Chair.
Sure. Go ahead.
Chairman Bartlett, that if you look at what was distributed, the next page in the packet, it was a summary that Mr. Miller put together that talks about the general fund support. And there's a figure on there, change in that position for 2020. Essentially, it echoes what April's saying, is that 28,896 positive and reduced from the prior year amount due to the general fund. So in essence, with the change. If you remember for the budget discussion, we met with the committee earlier last year for the 2020 budget when it was being developed. And we pointed out that they will no longer be budgeting for paying principal and interest in the neighbor's budget. In 2020 was the
Right.
first year. So you take out that approximately $550,000, that helped the bottom line as well. Otherwise, this would be a deficit as well.
I realize that.
Okay.
We said we track what they owed,
Right.
so.
And I
they-
can,
If they came out 29,000 to the good this year without any principal or interest expense, we should be adding roughly 1.5 or whatever to the debt or the general fund, because
Yep.
that's how we were always doing it.
And
We wanted to
the-
keep track of that.
the line on this 10-year summary that shows that is, if you look at the net position section, there's a line called net investment in capital assets. That 16.482 million is the amount that is owed from the neighbors at the end of 2020.
I'm
So
not
let's say-
looking at the right sheet now.
It's this one, oops, sorry, the 10-year
Oh.
summary. Now I'm going back to that.
A lot of paper to keep sorted.
Yeah,
No, that's not a report. Find that, Mr. Perfect.
okay. All right.
And that was, I guess, the bottom line intent, because the county's expectation when they built the facility was that the neighbors, and you've made that very clear with me coming on board after the fact, that the intent was that the neighbors would be paying back the debt, would pay the debt. The original expectation was they would pay it annually as the bonds were due. Unfortunately, the revenues haven't been there. And that's where we were building up that $8+ million amount owed to the general fund. Well, that was misleading and skewing the financial statements in the general fund, because realistically, we don't know when that's going to happen.
If ever.
If
I
ever,
agree.
right.
I just wanted to make sure we were
Right.
still tracking.
Yep, and I was very sensitive of that, because we reaffirmed when we made this change for the 2020 budget that that was still the expectation of the county board, because it dictated how we set this up. So yeah, that $16.4 million will adjust annually depending on how the operations. This will be handled similar to how you handle Health and Human Services with theirs. If they have money left at the end of the year, it's returned to the general fund. This will be adjusted as well. There would be principal and interest payments going out for another 10 years. But then if there's net money left at the end of each fiscal year, that can go to help pay this down. So
If I may, Mr. Chair.
Yes.
So we conceived the neighbors with the idea that it would not only cover its cost of operations and depreciation, but that it would cover the cost of the borrowing, principal and interest every year. And we taxed for that principal and interest too. I think it was part of the rationale for a long time, the levy for the borrowing was put into the general fund with the expectation that at the end of each year, there would be sufficient profit, for lack of a better term, to make that annual payment on the bond. That didn't happen, okay, much. This sheet that I provided you shows that in the past 7 years, there's been 2 years where if you look at operations and depreciation and then pensions or benefits changes, there's been 2 years when there's been profit. So another way of looking at it in terms of owed, if you stick with the way that we set it up, or our expectation when we set it up, then yes, everything that the general fund is said to pay on the principal and interest is owed by the neighbors, because the neighbors were supposed to pay for itself. But if you remove principal and interest and say, look, we taxed for it, and we're paying for it with the tax, how's the neighbors doing on its own? That's what this sheet we pulled together was for you. And in terms of, so one way of characterizing really what's owed the general fund is this bottom line here, the $3.3 million. But that has been necessary from the general fund to support operations, exclusive of principal and interest on the bonds. That's just to support operations. And when I think about it and try to characterize it, that's where I'm focusing, because that's the business part of this. It's not to say that businesses don't have to pay off their loans; they do, but I'd say we're already collecting for that. That's a dedicated thing. We obligated ourselves to tax for those bond payments, principal and interest. We're obligated to continue to do that. So I, in my mind, set that aside and look at operations, depreciation, and benefits to see how we're doing year to year. I don't know if that helps.
It does, I understand the thinking, but if you go back further, there was years that we were subsidizing the neighbors before we had any bonds.
You're absolutely right. It was the annual subsidy, if you will, of the nursing home before it was the neighbors.
Right. And you know,
and-
there was a few years that we levied for an extra 500,000
Cover.
for them, but the years prior to that, we subsidized them. You know, there was no special tax levy going in. There was tax levy, of course, was subsidizing them, but it wasn't a bond payment
Right.
or a special resolution that we, so I guess, you know, my way of thinking, when we built the building, we sold it, when I say we, us as a county board, sold it to the public that it would pay for itself. And so I think we should keep track of all the money that we've had to subsidize it.
Right.
Bottom line, if it ever turns around, hopefully it will someday. At one time it made money, you know, way back when, in 2000 or in the 90s, but
So if I may conclude then, what strikes me as valuable about this assessment is we know that, again, the neighbors was predicated on the ideas that it would not only cover its own cost, but the cost of the bonds. We know what the total cost of the bonds is. When all is said and done with interest, the cost is somewhere on the order of 27 million.
Give or
Somewhere
take.
on the order of $27 million. And we're obligated to tax for that. And we will continue to do that. So you could say in the end, the neighbors is going to owe $27 million to the county to meet its promise from when it was first built. But you have to tack onto it this information, which is in addition to that, or set that aside. This is how much we've been subsidizing the operations. You can see that the average is nearly $418,000 over the 7 years it's been in operation. $418,000 per year, total of $3.3 million for the duration. And in terms of a going interest, one that's going to be sustainable, I'm first focusing on this. I may be considered overly cynical, but I don't think so. I don't think the neighbors is ever going to be able to pay back $27 million.
It's gonna take many years.
Many, many years. Perhaps beyond the usable life of buildings themselves. If you consider that, again, in 2 years, we had a profit that could be applied to that. And those profits were, 29,000 last year and 108,000 in 2017. So hopefully that helps in terms of a going interest, in terms of a sustainable enterprise fund. That's where I'm focusing.
So your figures in red are what we've subsidized over and above the bond. and
That's correct.
everything.
That's correct.
Yeah.
I
I
think,
thought it was useful
I
too.
think it's very informational.
Yeah.
And eye-opening.
Well, remember too, anecdotally, the prior county board chair, Steve Rasmussen, used to say before the neighbors, we typically subsidize the skilled nursing facility to the tune of about $500,000 a year. We've always done that. And again, you look at the change in the average per year, just operations, which would be the situation if we hadn't built the neighbors. Okay, presumably. It's still running $418,000 a year subsidy. So that condition hasn't altered that much. That's true.
So this year, this last year, with a profit, let's say of 20, almost 29,000, and our expenses went down about 300, that's like 250,000 roughly, somewhere in there. Is that, can we look at anything on the bright side of that, or is it all because of COVID that it turned around? You got money from COVID, extra revenue, you had expenses were down because you had a one wing shut off. What do you, is there any bright spot there? Yeah, anybody?
I can speak to it a little bit. So with all the revenue that came from COVID also came expenses. So we had to attach all of that revenue to a COVID related expense. So not necessarily just because that money came in, did it mean that it was just without expense. So those kind of evened each other out because we did have added expense due to COVID and those all had to be linked together. So yes, part of it is that we had less overhead costs of having a household close. But for 2020, that was only closed half of the year. So it was open until I believe November was when we actually closed it. We had our last resident in Arrowhead. So census is down, so expenses were down, but census being down also means revenue is down too. So it all kind of evens out. The slight overhead of having a household closed for only a few months of the year wouldn't have a huge impact on lowering expenses. But yes, there's a bit of a bright side, but as Paul had said, it is only 1 year. So we can't necessarily say it means everything was turned around and it's going to be rainbows and butterflies going forward. But there is a bright side to it because all of those added money we got did come with expense too. So it wasn't just because COVID money came in that it's not the only reason that it is in the black.
I guess that's what I was thinking. So, it's quite a turnaround from $900,000 loss to $28,000
Profit. And again, Mr. Chairman, if I may, what I try to bear in mind is this, the goal with the neighbors is, it's a business, is to turn a profit.
Right.
All of the profit from the neighbors goes into the general fund. The general fund, you can characterize it as paying back the loan to build the neighbors in the first place, or you can treat that as a wash because we taxed for it and we're not obligating the neighbors to do anything about it. Or we can, treat it as an asset thing. I forget the way we're doing it now. We are acknowledging that we're keeping track of what was given to the neighbors in terms of the building. But for me, the useful thing is, what's our profit loss every year? And what we want to build toward is consistent black outcomes versus red. That's the really simple, straightforward assessment, I think.
And if I could add to that, Mr. Chair, to your question, Chairman Bartlett, That 28,000 or 29,000 in the black this year, in 2020 is a large part due to because you reduced your expenses by the roughly $500,000 for interest that was factored in and paid in the accounting for it in previous years when we were trying to record all that in the neighbors. The accounting change removed that from the budget for the neighbors because it's being taken care of in the debt service fund and paid for with tax levy. And now it's on your balance sheet in that net investment and capital assets. So you're still in that roughly $500,000 range of having a subsidy because the tax levy is paying
Right.
for the bonds and interest, or for the bond payments.
Kelly?
If I might, I do have to address the goal is a business to make a profit. That is one of the goals. The county specifically had a referendum to subsidize the previous version. It is also a service that is valued by the citizens of Dunn County above and beyond its value as a business. I just feel we shouldn't lose sight of that in the discussion about the bottom line.
And I appreciate that, Supervisor McCullough. Really appreciate that perspective. You're absolutely right. What Dunn County has demonstrated over the years is its commitment to providing this service. I guess my point is in terms of administration, in order
Absolutely.
to enhance the value of that service, the focus is to end up in the black at the end of each year. That not only is it a service that's valued, but it's one that pays for itself.
Yeah, and the only reason I felt the need
Yeah,
to bring it
no,
up was because the goal versus a goal.
You're
Yeah, right.
absolutely right. And I appreciate that.
Any other questions?
I think we should make April just hang around because she's just enjoying the conversation so much.
If there are
No,
none,
it is very good conversation. So,
if there are none, thank you very much, April.
okay, thank you. Yep, if anything does come up, just let me know. Have a good rest of the meeting and rest of the day.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks.
All right, next on the agenda, as always, is Quality Assurance Steering Committee updates. So our subcommittee that was supposed to report this month actually didn't have a meeting due to other things coming up, so we postponed it. So our meeting was a little bit shorter this month than normal, but we still did go over our other things. We went over COVID changes that I'll talk about a little bit later. Our dietary audits as always, as well as our monthly nursing reports. Nothing seemed out of the norm. We didn't have any trends for falls or infections or anything like that. Any questions on quality assurance?
No falls this time.
We do have falls, but no trends on falls.
No,
So
good. Yeah.
unfortunately, I don't think there'll be a month that we go without any falls, but that would be a good goal. All right, the next is the employment activity report. So I'll hand that over to Chris.
Hi, can everybody hear me?
Yep.
Okay. So for the month of May, in the form I've listed the types of recruitment. It's kind of the same. The Dunn County website, NeoGov feeds a lot of other sites, which is nice. And then I've listed it with job service also, since that's a free one to use. For the month of May, for the number of direct hire interviews, that's not including the interviews that we do for agency, we had 10 interviews scheduled. The interviews held, actually it should be 12 interviews scheduled. It should be 10 interviews held. We did have 2 no-shows. Number of positions offered out of the 10 interviews was 7. We had 6 accepted. And 4 of them were June start dates. So kind of, you get to the end of that month and, truly the start date is in June, but they were hired in May. It's just kind of a little cleanup at the end of the month. And the number of positions offered at higher than a step 3 were 0. We did not have any licensed nursing staff, no LPNs or RNs for this go round of hiring. We did have 7 resignations there listed there. I can read through them. A lot of part-time CNAs did leave because it got to that point where it was college graduation and it was just time to move on. They went to college for, respiratory therapist or, a few other things that, they moved on to. Open positions, were, adjusted, based on the hiring and people leaving. We did have one full-time culinary mentor open that will be filled in June here, towards the end of the month. If you go down to leaves of absences, we have, kind of the various ones. The educational related, just because it was May, that will go down in June because a lot of the college students came back in June, not, the tail end of May. So that's still up a little bit. We have a couple of part-time CNAs that are on a unpaid military leave. We have a CNA that's on FMLA and a homemaker that is on an unpaid FMLA, since that's a part-time position. Work comp lost hours. It was a very good month for work comp or incidents or injuries at the facility. We had no lost hours for that. If we go down to in the red italicized sentence, for absences or missed shifts due to COVID-19, that's if you call in sick, if you were exposed to a positive person, that type of thing, not people that have had COVID. That was 37 shifts or roughly 324 hours. It's always kind of an odd number because some of the people work 8, some of the people work 12. So it's kind of a good average of what was missed hours wise for COVID related issues. Does anybody have any questions?
Doesn't sound like it, Chris.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yep.
So I'd also like to add under the employment activity report, I know we've talked about this almost every month for a while now about the CNA training program. So we did actually hear back from the state. So we are now in the process of filling out all of the required paperwork and such for that. So we did finally get a response from them. So we're moving
Yeah,
forward
sounds
with
good.
that.
Way to go, and I wasn't even gonna
No.
say anything.
But now that we've opened that door.
Yes. So we're in the process of doing the paperwork to get certified again and have that process. It is a little bit of, once we get the paperwork in, they have to come in and do a survey of just like the space for training and things like that with the same teams that do our annual surveys. And it's a bit of a process, but at least we took a step in the next direction. So.
Very good.
All right, next is a resident referral report. So that's on the back of the employment report. So at the beginning of the month, we had 111 residents in-house. We had 31 referrals. 11 of those were accepted to the facility and 20 residents were not, or referrals were not. As you see, these are still low comparatively speaking to past years. So we're just hoping that those pick up as COVID continues to decrease. We had 3 people that went to their first choice, 2 of which were swing beds, and 1 was a facility closer to home. We had 1 that was not in network with insurance, 3 that were either behavioral health issues or legal issues, 1 bariatric over the weight limit. We had 5 that expired at the hospital and 7 that went home. So we're still seeing the number one reason that people are not admitted being people going home, choosing to not go into facilities. This has stayed pretty steady throughout all of COVID. Even though if people are fully vaccinated, they don't need to quarantine and we can have visitors and such now. People that aren't fully vaccinated would have to quarantine when they come to the facilities. So making the assumption that that is some of that number still is people don't want to be quarantined for 14 days, as well as not being able to have visitors for those 14 days unless it's a compassionate care situation. So that number still stays pretty high of people going home instead of going to a nursing home. At the end of the month, we had 114 residents in the facility. So we're happy that that number keeps increasing. We had no transfers out of the facility and we had 2 deaths, which is quite low for the month of May. But unfortunately, at the beginning of June, we had quite a few long-term deaths. So our numbers did drop a little bit, but we are filling those long-term beds as we speak. There were 6 discharges in last month. We had, as of today, there's 111 residents in the facility with 4 admits in the next day or 2. So 4 accepted admissions between today and tomorrow. So bumping back up to that 114, 115 range. So.
I'm wondering in the central building, are people coming in now for rehab?
Mhm. Yep, we do have residents in for rehab. Arrowhead is still closed, so we haven't had enough referrals to warrant reopening that household and staffing it. But we still do have rehab referrals. We did have them throughout all of COVID, just not nearly as much, but we have seen that pick up. So we have a lot more in and out in those short-term rehabs. So lots of discharges and admissions and busyness in Fireside. So that's good to see that pick up again. Any questions on referrals or admissions? All right. Next, we'll move on to the Environment and Facilities Report. So I can hand that over to Scott.
Morning, Scott.
Good morning, everyone. Can everyone hear me okay?
No, we can't hear you at all.
No?
You're good.
Okay. As far as facilities, thing is been going pretty smooth. The guys working on typical work orders, maintaining things. The grounds have been slowly getting better. With the lack of rain, has slowed down the grass growing. So I've gotten some more of the trimming done. They started working on that. Started working on flower gardens to weed those out, get those all looking better. Some of that is fill-in work. The big thing that happened was the East Neighborhood Survey. Facilities did very good. It was Josh's first survey as a facility technician at the neighbors. We ended up with 3 minor sites. I know Carmen is going to give more on the survey in a little while, but we ended up with, for facilities, 3 minor sites, which Josh has looked into taking care of already. It was a good survey for both him and I. We had a state engineer that was different from in the past, and he looked at things differently, but walking through the building with him gave Josh a little more confidence in what he needs to look at as far as preparing for a survey. So it was definitely educational. So we're going forward from there, repair these things, and the next survey upcoming would be in the West building. So we will be even more prepared for that survey coming up. I guess that is all for my report. Does anyone have any questions?
No, thanks, Scott.
Thank you.
All right. Next on my report is the culinary mentor recruitment update. So Chris touched on this a little bit. So as you know, our culinary mentor left last month, and we did recruit for that, held several interviews, and we did hire someone. He will be starting on the 28th of this month. His name is David Drager. He comes to us with over 20 years of experience as a dietary manager, which is the equivalent position in other skilled nursing facilities. So we're excited to have him start. So in a couple of weeks. So,
Nice.
and when he starts, we'll probably have him as well as Alyssa, our life enhancement mentor, come to a meeting to introduce them both. She was busy today with an East picnic. So it was a busy day. Any questions on that at all? A COVID-19 update. So we have had a few changes with COVID related activities at the neighbors, one of which is activities itself. So I believe last month we talked a little bit about communal dining and activities starting up again. for residents that they can be close to each other if they've been vaccinated, which over 90% of our residents have. So we're very fortunate that we can hold activities with people being able to sit by each other and not have to be spaced out and playing bingo from their doorways anymore, or things like that. And we've now been actually able to do outings. So working with KT and the Public Health Department to make sure that we're doing safe outings, but having our residents go to things that are outdoors, we are able to do now. So they went to the band concert on Tuesday night, which is a favorite of a lot of our residents for years. So very exciting to have some normalcy again for them. And that was the activity that Alyssa will be doing today, is a picnic for the residents outside for the East Building too. So doing a little bit more now that the weather's nice enough, and hopefully it stays not so hot, because that also affects that as well. So testing has changed a little bit at the neighbors for resident or staff testing for COVID-19, the routine screening. The state of Wisconsin had originally had different guidelines than the federal government. The state's guidelines were stricter than the federal government. About a week or two ago, they decided to align with the feds. So we now only have to test monthly if we are below 5% county positivity rate for unvaccinated individuals. So that has lessened the burden on NDC staff for testing significantly. Before, we were testing weekly for all unvaccinated staff, and now we're down to monthly. So that's very nice. That would change if we had an outbreak, which is any staff or resident testing positive. It just has to be one person. Then we would have to go to weekly again for all staff, not just unvaccinated. But we have been very fortunate to not be in an outbreak for quite some time. It's been months since we had our last staff positive. So that has helped significantly for testing hours and time, such with that. PPE usage, as you're all aware, as we all don't have masks on here, the county has changed the PPE and mask wearing protocols for vaccinated staff and individuals in the building. Skilled nursing facilities has not changed, so we still are required to wear masks as well as eye protection when in the facilities as staff. Residents, on the other hand, if they are fully vaccinated and around only other fully vaccinated people, they do not have to wear masks in the facility anymore. So staff are still masked and wearing eye protection. I know that is something that a lot of staff are hoping changes soon, but the regulations are still there that we have to have both no matter what. So those are the main COVID updates. Does anyone have any questions?
Yeah, I guess
Lots
we
of
do.
questions.
I was out biking past the neighbors the other day, and I saw a golf cart towing a little trailer with a couple of wheelchair users in it. That's part of the getting out more now. That's fantastic. They look so happy.
Yes, that is a favorite. So the tram, we take that kind of all around on the path and everything. And it can hold 2 wheelchairs in it. And the activity staff do that. They just take a phone with them because it has been known to get stuck and things like that. But so yeah, the tram is a favorite of a lot of people.
Yeah, that's great. I hadn't known it existed until I was biking by. Hey,
What's a good idea?
It's a golf cart with a trailer behind it with a ramp into it. You can load 2 wheelchair users.
Very nice.
Yeah, it just looked like a delightful little.
Kind of like a hayride.
Yeah.
Mike, you had a question?
So I'm curious, what percentage of the staff is vaccinated?
We were about, when we got vaccinated as the whole, we were at about 75%. Now with the in and out, we haven't calculated an exact number in the last couple of weeks, but we are seeing a lot of our staff coming in already vaccinated, since a lot of them did come from other healthcare settings. And then we did just have a group of new orientees that were all young high school students, and they all came in and were fully vaccinated too. So we have seen a lot of, it's probably around the same amount of people that are, because most of ours coming in are vaccinated.
So I've got a question, not really related to the facility, but You mentioned these high school kids coming in to be vaccinated. Were they vaccinated because they were coming to work there, you think, or were they vaccinated just because of school or some other reason?
Yeah, I'm not 100% sure because we didn't necessarily ask. We only just ask if they come in, we ask for the proof of their vaccination so that they don't have to get on the testing schedule. But I would assume probably just by their choice prior to working there. We don't require it as we don't have the ability to have enough extra staff to require it. So it might be because they were thinking of working in a healthcare setting, but I would assume it was just a personal choice by them or their family.
That's encouraging that,
Yeah.
you know, school kids are being vaccinated.
Mhm.
Yeah. No.
Any other COVID questions? All right. So the next thing on the agenda is the East Neighborhood Survey. So as we had talked about quite a while ago now, a year ago, full surveys had been stopped due to COVID. So the annual inspections, for those of you who are new on the committee, we are surveyed annually in all 3 neighborhoods separately by the state of Wisconsin and or the federal government. Typically the state of Wisconsin, sometimes a federal surveyor comes with them or after them to basically make sure that we are following all of our many regulations. They come in, it's about 3 days typically, and there's normally 3 to 4 surveyors. They look at everything across the board, food, activities, nursing care, social services, documentation, physicians, pharmacy, pretty much anything that they can look at, they're going to dig into. They come separately to each building and they're spread out. So they've been on pause for about a year, and now they are starting to catch back up. So it had been almost exactly 2 years since the East Building had had a survey, and they came, now is 2 weeks ago, to the East Building. So we were expecting them. It was a very, very good survey. The survey team was completely different than we had ever had before. 2 of them had been in our facility once for just single day COVID surveys, but they are pretty new surveyors, as well as our region combined with the Rhinelander region. So our surveyors typically came out of Eau Claire. Now they combined the Rhinelander office and the Eau Claire office. So we are seeing different surveyors, which can be nice and can be not nice sometimes, but they were actually great. They were there 3 days. They didn't ask for a whole lot out of us. They were much more tech savvy, so they got almost everything off of the computer, which was great. And we actually ended up having 0 health citations, which was very positive. As Scott mentioned, we did have 3 life safety code citations, all of them very minor, with one of them anticipated to be what's called a C level. So it doesn't even require a plan of correction. So most citations start at D levels and higher. The one that was at a C level was basically a tag on a fire extinguisher got thrown away that shouldn't have. So just the documentation that they had been checked, they were all checked. It just happened to be they put the new 4-year tag on it, so we didn't have proof that they were checked. So he technically had to cite it, but we won't have any plan of correction for it because we did what we were supposed to do, just didn't have the little tag that said we did. So so that's a very, very good survey. So it was a good one to have coming back into surveying again. As Scott mentioned, West will be our next survey. We are unaware if they are going to keep them spread out how they were, or if they're just trying to catch up. I would anticipate and hope that they keep them spread out as their annual surveys. If they do all of the surveys right in a row for everybody to try to catch up, then everybody's survey is going to be this time going forward. So I would anticipate they keep them spread out. So we would be expecting West survey in the end of the summer, early fall. I believe they were here in August 2 years ago. So it was a good start to surveys again. We were a little bit anxious for them, as we have heard that that has not been the case in other parts of the state. With a building in the southern part of the state received 50 citations a few weeks ago. So we were very happy with the outcome of that survey. So,
And we're glad that surveyor isn't in Rhinelander.
yes. Yeah. Any questions on survey at all?
That's fantastic. Congratulations.
All right. Is there any other questions for me at all or anything else?
Keep up the good work.
Okay. Hearing nothing, we'll go into item 6 on the agenda, 6A. Budget adjustment related to the NDC positions.
All right. So this is a continuation of what we discussed last month. So I sent out a revised staff report. It had all the same information just in case. So we had everything from last month, but then a revised section at the end that had the numbers and data that was requested by the committee last month. So it includes the turnover rate over the years prior to homemakers as well as or the homemakers being removed as well as since. So in 2016, that was when we still had PM homemakers, there was 30 termination or turnover, 30 terminations that year, either leaving or actual terminations. And then in 17, we jumped up to 50. That was the year that the PM homemakers were removed. And then in 18, we had 51, 19, 42, 20, 45, and so far this year, 17. So there was an increase in that. We couldn't go back previously to that because it was the old payroll system and everything. But so it had jumped up since those going down or going away. The next under item 2 was hours worked by NDC staff and agency staff. So we could not necessarily pull out the actual overtime. So we just did hours worked and the increase in agency hours versus NDC hours. Over the years, when we tried to pull out overtime out of SAP, it couldn't allow us to pull it out unless we did each individual staff person, because our people are not labeled PM, AM, night shift in SAP. That's just a scheduling way of doing it. So they would just be CNAs or RNs, LPNs. So it didn't actually work to get that statistic. But we did NDC staff hours versus agency staff hours. In 16, we had 0 agency staff, and then the hours for NDC staff. And then every year since, it has gone up for agency staff with our staffing hours going down. And then in this year so far, that's where we're at for 2021. And then the final item was the overtime hours. As I said before, we couldn't get the actual specifics for PM staff, but we looked at the total cost of our overtime. It's general for CNAs, not necessarily just PMs, but we took an average of the last 5 years of what our overtime average per year is, which was the 7076 there hours per year. And then we multiplied that by 1.5 of the average wage. So we did the median of the CNA pay scale, then multiplied that by 1.5, which got us 24.23 an hour would be what the average wage for a CNA on overtime would be. And then we multiplied that by the average hours, and that got us to the 171,454 and 14 cents roughly per year in overtime hours. And that also does not include the in lieu of fringe, which we then calculated out to be about $23,000. So we're roughly at the $200,000 mark for costs of overtime if you add in the in lieu of fringe with that as well. And then the last paragraph just kind of gives an outline of that these numbers, we could say there could be related to the PM homemakers. We can't necessarily say it's because of that. There's a lot of other factors that could have happened in there. We just wanted to highlight that we're not saying this is all due to not having PM homemakers, because we can't make that causation. There might be a correlation there, but we can't directly say all of this is due to this. We're going to put in PM homemakers and all of this will be wiped out, because that is not the case. But it is an idea of having some of these things be adjusted and increase the staff morale, lower turnover, and then lower the need to be dependent on agency staff would be the goal. So highlighting the different things that could have been caused by it, but not necessarily are a guarantee that it was directly related. Any questions for me on the new information?
Carmen, can I add something quick?
Sure.
Okay, so for the pool usage, that is through March 31st. That's the period I could get out of PBJ, the concrete hours for pool. The NDC staff hours are more current, but pool, I did the last reporting period. And that's the best, that's the best matrix to get those numbers. So it's through March 31st through pool, for pool, sorry.
Do you have questions?
So, Mr. Chair, if I may.
Yes,
Okay.
sure, go ahead.
First of all, I am very impressed with the work that Carmen has done in pulling the proposal together. It's the kind of information that we need, that this committee needs to make an informed decision about a proposed budget adjustment. I zero in on on page 2, the proposed additions and the costs that we're talking about for 6 months at the various steps, from step 1, which is about 104,000, to step 5, which is about 114,000. If we approve this for this year, we're looking at that additional potential $114,000 cost. I think this needs to be considered by this committee and ultimately the county board, which will be responsible for making a decision on the budget adjustment, in light of our earlier conversation about the support for the neighbors. Excluding the principal and interest, simply looking at operations, depreciation, change in pension and benefits. We've been averaging $418,000 of general fund support. This will add 100 to 114 without the guarantee, as Carmen correctly notes at the end of her report, and I really appreciate that too. We don't know that bringing on the PM homemakers is going to reduce our turnover. We hope that it will. We've got reason to think that it will, but we don't know. We also cannot project possible savings in pool to see if it offsets the additional costs of the PM homemakers. There's just no way to do that calculation. So we can anticipate that this proposal will add to the deficit, the need for general fund support of the neighbors, somewhere to the tune of $100,000, and maybe a little more, maybe a little less. The other point, well, and that has to be considered in the context not only of the neighbors itself as an operation, but the entire county budget. We've got to wear our hats as the neighbors committee, and then switch hats and look at it as a county board member responsible for the budget overall. Because this committee can endorse this, but it's going to be saying this instead of potentially something else. This instead of some other service. And then the final point I think the committee wants to keep in mind is, do we have enough time really to gauge the effect of bringing on PM homemakers to see if it has a positive impact on retention of CNAs before the end of the year? And it's not even the end of the year. It's really before the first part of October, when the budget for 22 has to be substantially in shape. Do we have enough time to gauge the effect of the PM homemakers on retention? and reduction in pool costs. I don't know, maybe we will, hopefully we will, if we do this, but we need to bear that in mind, because if we bring in the PM homemakers midway through 21, Carmen, of course, will ask for the PM homemakers as part of the budget for 22. And then instead of a half a year of wages, she's included in her report, step 1, 3, and 5, you're talking anywhere from $212,000 to $231,000 more onto the budget. Is that going to be onto the support from the general fund? Or will it reduce turnover, improve morale, and reduce pool? We simply don't know. So I think it's important to keep those points in mind as we deliberate on this budget adjustment, and encourage you to think not only in terms of what's best for the neighbors per se, but consider it in context of the broader fiscal considerations of the county. Thank you.
I have a question. What year was it that they pulled the PM homemakers?
It was in 2017.
And that was strictly for budgetary reasons.
Correct.
There was also one year that they ended up being in the black for operations.
Yeah.
Chairman.
Yes.
That scenario, can you come up with a figure what that would be a saving?
Like savings, I guess it depends on how much it reduces the turnover rate as well as the usage of pool. So that's kind of what Paul said. We can't really come up with anything until we know how much it does. I mean, I think it would be unrealistic to say that adding PM homemakers would completely get rid of pool staff on PMs. That's not feasible. We just, in the current market for CNAs, no matter what, we would have some. I guess the main goal of this would be to kind of stop the bleeding of continuing having CNAs leave and having to continue to add and add and add agency staff, because it's continuing to add a bigger deficit on the nursing budget. Yes, we've made changes that have allowed to not be in such an overall deficit, but the nursing budget is still bleeding money for paying out pool staff. So hopefully it would reduce the number of pool, but in addition to that, stop the adding on of more pool. So the costs going into it, I can't directly say if it'll be covered or not, but that would be the goal.
Sure, can I follow up on this
Yes.
question? For right now, for example, we had filled 14 spots with CNAs. How much savings would it be just to pick a number out of the air and say, now we're only gonna fill 7 with pool?
Calculator out because my brain doesn't work that fast.
I just cut it in half. Just
Yeah.
To see what it looked like.
I guess it also depends on how much those agency staff are working, because their regular rate and their overtime rate are different, and just a ballparking number of, so if we do 6 months. So one CNA for 6 months would be about $52,000 for a pool staff. If you average out their wages to be with overtime and all of that, that's for one CNA.
52, you said?
Yeah, off of a quick calculation
Yeah.
of if they're working full-time hours for 6 months of somewhere around there for one staff member. If we reduce it by one staff.
If we reduce, if we had one less pool, we'd have to increase a regular.
A
CNA.
regular staff,
So
yes.
this 52 is the difference? or-
No, 52 would be the cost of one agency staff for about 6 months. And then the cost of our staff, I'd have to pull out the actual comparisons with the benefit package and everything like that. I know Jane has those numbers in a spreadsheet somewhere, but we could get that number back to you.
I didn't even expect this number right now. That was nice. I'm thinking our regular staff is less than 75% of this. Just to give us an idea of some numbers, how many it would take to reduce the pay for this.
Turn the numbers around.
Yeah, just, say, okay, how many do we need? Oh, this won't do it, this will. And then we can see if they'd be realistic. But the other thing, if we don't do anything, nothing's gonna change. We're gonna continue to support the neighbors at the level we're at now, or more so. It's possible, we're looking at it, it's a possible launch, we don't know. Best case scenario is we get all the goals met.
My concern is if, okay, county board approves this, but we have to cut something from the neighbors for next year, where would we cut?
I'd have to look at it specifically.
I know, I'm just, that's my concern.
But from the neighbors necessarily, or from?
Well, you're
conservation?
adding 200,000 to it, 231,000 for next year.
But it's a big
Correct.
picture, right?
I agree. I'm not,
Oh, I see what you're saying.
you know what I'm saying?
If I might, so I wish we had a little bit more longitudinal data from before 2016. Arbitrarily saying that the removal of the PM homemakers is entirely responsible for the jump in turnover. That's possible, but not probable. Best case scenario, we're returning to that previous, be about a third reduction in turnover. It looks like it's about something between 28 and 35% year to year. And so I guess we'd have to look at sort of the bottom line of, if we, even with the best case scenario, would that cover the costs? And that's the number that, and I realize we can't get an exact number because pool staff is variable and the overtime is variable, but that's sort of the line it has to meet.
I agree with Kelly.
And the number of residents would determine.
If I may, Mr. Chair, too. So part of what I think makes this a difficult decision in terms of a budget adjustment for this year, fiscal year 21, is the discussion we'll end up having for the budget for 22. Because when we pull everything together, if we find that the budget is not balanced and other things considered, like the percentage of the general fund balance has to be a certain percent to maintain a credit rating. We've got multiple other requests for personnel. It is conceivable, certainly, that the conclusion will be we have to cut the PM homemakers again. We have to lock them out. So in that scenario, you face the possibility of hiring people. They get started in July at the earliest, and then their jobs are done come January because we can't afford to keep them. I'm not saying that will happen. And I recognize, by the way, what I'm doing here is I'm playing the devil's advocate on this proposal. I think that's part of what you need for a informed decision. One thing too, I think you talked about this maybe last month, Carmen, but do we know from exit interviews with CNAs who principally worked night shift that a big reason that they're leaving is because they're performing homemaker duties?
Not in those words exactly. I would say a lot of the reason is feeling overworked. So
Okay.
that would be, I would think that is in relation to that. For example, I actually spoke to another area nursing home administrator the other day that their staff were saying they were overworked with our same CNA ratios, with having laundry and housekeeping and dietary staff that are doing what our homemakers are doing. So it's becoming a trend they feel overworked here, doing their regular CNA job and then additional duties on top of that, which they don't have to do in other places.
Can you repeat that? Did you just say that another nursing home where they do have, in essence, homemakers, the CNAs are still saying they're overworked?
Yes.
So how is adding CNAs going to address the overwork comments for us?
So,
I mean, adding homemakers rather.
yeah, well, I was just trying to lay out the idea that our staff are saying that with having extra duties, and they're even saying that without those extra duties, so we're on the lesser end of that, is what I'm saying, is they could go to that nursing home and feel less overworked than here, because they're not doing the extra duties there.
That's a kind of a fighting battle.
When did we lose the training of CNAs in our facility? What year?
I'd have to look. It was, I know it was a year that we received an IJ citation. I'd have to look up the actual year. I'm not 100% sure.
I was just wondering if that would, you know, be close to when this back in 16 probably won't be. It'd be more like 18.
Yeah, I'm thinking more like 18.
I don't actually, I know it was due to, if a facility has an immediate jeopardy citation, they can no longer be a training
Yeah,
facility.
that's,
So
I remember that IJ, and
it was in the
we
section.
disputed it, but I'm
I
thinking
just-
that was 18.
You know, I'm wondering if there's something else that entered in also that we started losing CNA, our own CNAs, because I think if we have the training here and they're here working, I think you've got a lot better chance of keeping them in the facility. They're used to it if you show that you're fair, whatever, you know, that they may stay. So that may help the situation of having CNAs without doing this. I'm just throwing that out there. Because I totally understand where Mr. Miller is coming from, because I also hear about all the positions throughout the county as a whole that we need extra, that this department is overworked, or this department needs this, or whatever. And I'm also aware that we're doing a class and compensation study, which I thoroughly believe that we're going to find some areas in our county are underpaid compared to our norm. And so instead of looking at just maybe a 1% or 1.5% raise next year, we might be looking at a 3% total, because of some that we want to bring up to the normal compensation of our peers, so we're not losing people that way. And I keep in mind that last year we dropped the steps. So to do that 2 years in a row would probably hurt us keeping our employees. There's a lot of things that come into here, and if we add 200,000 to our budget next year, I honestly don't believe that. Maybe Carmen can come up with something, but I think the neighbors is running pretty lean right now. So to come up with an extra 200,000 from someplace else, to drop something else, I don't know that she can. There's a lot of things that unless I've thought about this, unless we started running as more of a private institution, because I've heard you mention that the difference between us and private places is they try to turn a profit, so they run with less people, less staff working, minimum amount of staff. Probably some other stuff. Maybe that might be a way to drop to 200,000, but otherwise to keep doing what we're doing at the neighbors right now, I don't think Carmen can cut 200,000 out of the budget. You have to make drastic changes is what I'm saying.
And I'll volunteer that in talking with people in the industry, I'm not at all disputing. In fact, I'm agreeing with Sharon Bartlett's comments. The real difference between a publicly owned facility like ours and a privately owned is in the benefits, and specifically in retirement. Because the private facilities don't pay a retirement pension. Their salaries may be as good or better than public. Their health insurance may be as good or better than public. They don't have pensions. And that government cost is what makes running a public skilled nursing facility more expensive than a privately owned one.
And it's, the way I understand, it's illegal for us to treat some employees different.
Oh, absolutely. If they're employees, they are.
We could not say.
No, we can't say you're not going to get a
if you-
pension.
If you want more pay, you can not take that.
The problem, of course, with recruitment or retention is getting young people, CNAs, to value the pension. You know, well, that's going to be when I'm an old person. I'm not even going to do this that long. It's not worth it to me. So they're looking at the salaries, and some of them are looking at health. Pension just doesn't resonate with them. It's only when they get to be old people like me that they go, geez, those pensions are a pretty good thing.
And the market is, or the industry has changed for CNAs is more of a stepping stone job now.
Exactly.
There's very few
not a career.
people that go to it for a career. So it's to become a nurse, or I was a CNA, to become an administrator. There's all these different health jobs that it's just a way to get your foot in the door. So
Kind of like what Kelly said, is there a way that even best case scenario, this would cover the cost? You talked, I can see, it's from 30 to 60% difference in these. So if you just took 30% and say we reduced our evening pool staff 30%, how much would that save? And I know it's hard, but at least you've got a number. You can say, okay, 30%, and you can kind of give an estimate. And if it doesn't even come close, that can give us a really good idea of what we want to do. But if it would come close or even make money or come out ahead, well, then that'd be something we want to look at.
I agree, Mike. And
Yeah, it's.
I agree. And you budget now for pool help, correct?
yes,
So I would think this would be an easier sell, for lack of a better term, if you waited, put it in the budget for less pool help, more homemakers for the 22 budget. But I know you need help right now. You know what I'm saying? If you're thinking that you're gonna use less pool help, you could put the homemakers in there for the evening for 22 and less pool help for 22 to cover that. It's the same thing.
But I think a little bit more information, as what Mike was asking, what's the difference? If we thought we could save a third, what's the difference in, as close as we can come up with, the difference in price between pool help and our own CNAs. So we know that difference would be what we would save, and then to offset what this would cost us.
I'm just, again, playing a little bit of devil's advocate of other things that also are affected by it. I know we keep talking about the cost of pool help and everything else, but there's also an added cost of turnover and training a new CNA. Every time a new person comes into the building, that's a cost. The overtime cost of someone, say an AM CNA, staying 2 extra hours because there's 2 people fell on the floor and the CNAs are helping that and they're trying to get dinner ready for someone. There's a lot of added costs that are a little less trackable than that as well. And then also, we haven't talked about it much today, we did last month, but the potential added cost of lowering revenue of unhappy residents as well. So that was something we talked about a little bit more last time, but we've had numerous complaints from families and residents about how much different the service is on PMs versus days and things like that as well. So the more and more that people are getting frustrated with that, the more and more that gets back out into the community. That also then feeds into Supervisor McCullough's statement of this is also a service as the nursing home to the community. And now we are offering less of a service on the PMs than we are during the day.
I guess say the two numbers that I would want to see, and I know it's going to be arbitrary and ballpark, not guaranteed numbers, but I'd like to see sort of a best case number of about say that reduction is entirely due, turnover is entirely due to and it probably isn't, but absolutely the best case scenario is like what, 28% reduction in turnover. And if we could say, this is the best case scenario, we don't think we're going to meet it, this is the number. And again, I know it's not going to be precise, but ballpark somewhere in here. And then maybe one at 10%, which I think would be more realistic. But just something like that, so we've got a little bit more that we can sink our teeth into, because I don't think with what we have here, I don't think that the board as a whole would approve it.
Are you talking about the 22 budget, or are you talking about the budget adjustment, which is actually what's in front of us today?
Well, at this point, I think I don't think this is good. I don't think we would get this approved today.
I don't either.
I don't think it would get through board. We wouldn't be looking at August or September. I think at this point, we almost have to just say, what would it be? What it would look like for 22. I love the idea of the 6-month experiment, but I don't think it's going to be practical with sort of the pace at which the board works.
Well, if we're gonna do a 6-month comparison, we should have started this in probably May. Because we more than happy. I'm saying it should have went to the board in May.
Yeah,
Because it's
right.
gonna take some time to
Recruit,
to hire
train.
some people. To get a 6-month test. So, yeah, if we bring this back to our next meeting, it's going to come to the August to the September board meeting, which is going to be next year's budget.
Yeah, because I mean, the political considerations are different from the economic and practical considerations.
If I may, if this committee were to recommend this budget adjustment for this year, it would be in front of executive in July, and it would be in front of the county board in July.
Right.
Last week in July. That would give August for recruitment. Probably the earliest starts would be September.
Yeah.
So you would only, you're right, have September to look at the consequence before you're making a decision on the budget in October.
That's
Yeah.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. So I'm not.
The
I'm
only
not,
consequence to that is the amount of turnover spend that could
absolutely,
happen
Oh,
the
yeah.
rest of the year.
that.
but it is the status quo.
If I may, Mr. Chair. Yes. From a budget process standpoint, now would you keep going in direction on what we're gonna do? Yes, Carmen's initial budget is in, but it could be factored into your conversation when you have standing committee.
Could you speak into the mic more, please?
It wasn't, sorry. Am I on now?
As much as you ever are.
Yes, you're good now.
Okay, I'm sorry about that. This new hybrid approach confuses me yet. No, I think from a budget process standpoint, it would be best to get direction if possible today, if you're not willing, or if we're not ready to bring this forward as a budget adjustment. I like the idea that you brought up, Mr. Chair, about, factoring this into the 22 budget, no matter what happens for this year, give that direction so that we have time to put the meaningful data together, incorporate that in, have good information for you when you're deliberating this in August.
I think it'd be
Well, yeah, that way it will be part of the overall budget that's distributed to the full county board at the end of July. If the proposal for PM homemakers in 22 were included, that would give a better picture of potential impact and clearer direction in terms of the decisions we'll have to make once we get a handle. As those of you who've been on the board long enough know, every year, the initial take is a deficit. Every year, there's something to make up. Let's be realistic. Let's get all of the asks. So Carmen, I'm sorry, is the homemakers is not in the budget you submitted? Yeah, I think it's pretty important that if you think it's worth looking at as the committee, that you give direction to Carmen to at least incorporate the PM homemakers into the fiscal year 22 budget request.
I would like to see it. So,
Could
Yeah.
we see Carmen bring back the questions that Kelly had? Yeah, at the next meeting, and she still have time to put it in next year's budget, added if this committee feels it should be.
We're reaching a critical point that if we're going to include this in the July, I'm going to need that information here within a week or two. Realistically, I would echo that conservative perspective. Go ahead
Carmen
and
can do the
include it.
numbers. Include it, exactly.
Yeah.
Include it. It can always be
That's what I
pulled
would
out. And
Right.
Carmen can pull together the numbers for consideration by the committee in July regardless.
that's what I would do.
Yeah, that was what I was gonna suggest. In addition to time constraints, it's an easier political lift too. I don't know that we'll be able to prove it even under those circumstances, but I think we're more likely to be able to do it if we do it as part of the at this point, part of the regular budgetary process, and build in some of the assumptions about turnout.
Mr. Chair, if I could, certainly the conversation can continue and should continue at the level here, to bake this concept even further. It's just a matter of time with these other things, especially the budget process, with so much coming together at one time.
I've tried to talk Keith into working 12 hours a day every day, but he won't do it.
Not 7 days a week.
Carmen, you did this work and it's really great. I hope it's not frustrating to say, go back and do some more. But we
I'm
couldn't
sure
have
it
asked-
is. I'm sure it is.
we couldn't have asked these questions without what we have here.
Yeah.
So, thanks. I appreciate you thinking outside, not just doing the same stuff, because if we do the same thing, we get the same.
Actually, I will share with the board, if I may, Mr. Chair. We've got a very good administrator in Carmen. The way she knows her stuff, the thoroughness and the conscientious approach she takes to these kinds of things, we would be very hard pressed, in my opinion, to find somebody better in that role. So I echo what Supervisor Kinnear says.
I agree. We'd like to help you more, but we don't think it's gonna work.
Well, just pull out your checkbook.
Yeah. But I just feel as if you can get that number closer on the pool help.
And over time,
Yep.
Understanding the major assumptions we have to make.
yeah,
Everybody, Steve?
I have one more question. Do we really know what other facilities have for staff on how many residents and how much staff is on?
We know what they tell you, I guess. So we can tell based on a couple of different things. So all of our staffing, not direct ratios necessarily, but the 5-star for staffing is public knowledge. So you could tell if a building was severely understaffed, severely overstaffed, things like that based on 5-star metrics. And then basically what we hear from our counterparts, I guess. I am in contact with other nursing homes administrators, as well as on different calls and things like that. People talk about it. I would say we used to be on the very high end for staffing, and I'd say every year we're moving closer and closer to the norm. And I would say right now we're at the norm for at least being a 5-star building. That yes, there are buildings that staff a lot less than us, but then they also aren't as high a quality of buildings. So I guess that's another thing that I don't think that we are willing to sacrifice the quality of care to meet the needs and wants of our residents, which we've kind of pointed out is also a different aspect of being a publicly owned skilled nursing facility, as we are a service to residents of the county as well, that we wouldn't want to lower our standard of care necessarily. So there are buildings that have lower staffing ratios, but then that comes at a cost. So I would say comparable buildings to us, we are at the norm.
Yeah, I agree. Anything else on this subject? Okay, hearing none, review of the vouchers. Everyone get a chance to take a look at them? Hopefully so. Are there any questions on them? If not, we'll go into Jane's report. Been waiting for us for a while, huh, Jane?
I have been, and I didn't speak up on any of your other topics, although I wanted to. Don't have enough information right now. Okay, so the census report continues to show heavy Medicaid, average Medicare A, and lower private pay census as far as payer breakouts. That does affect our bottom line. It ends up having us have a little bit lower revenue now, but then the Medicaid supplemental payment will make up for that based on our higher Medicaid usage. So you do have that. The aging report is up a little bit. We've had some turnover in staff and some later in the month Medicare A submissions. We're not getting them out as fast, which means the payment comes in like the 3rd of the next month instead of the 28th. So it's all in posting, but it's all going to work out. The longer term collections are being reduced every month, it seems. So that's a good trend still. And census has been a little bit higher now, so your front end of the census or of the receivables will be higher, which is normal. Any questions on those issues? Okay, going to the incomes. The income statement looks fairly good this month. Our numbers were up. Our even with Arrowhead being closed, we seem to have met our budget as far as our variance for the month-to-date revenue. It looks good. We had more revenue come in booked. Year-to-date revenue is still off according to budget, down $500,000. We budgeted as if it wasn't COVID, as we were instructed to do. And if COVID wasn't here, our census truly would be higher. But according to budget, we're $500,000 short in the revenue department. Nursing services is looking good, but the census is lower, meeting budget there. I questioned the bistro again, why we have costs in the bistro. That is an unemployment claim that keeps going. And then if you look at housekeeping, I'm not sure if in the past housekeeping included labor, but we seem to have a trend of having extra money in the housekeeping area. Whether or not that has anything to do with the homemakers not being posted to housekeeping department. I don't know if they ever were. I can look that up and give you some history there, go back a couple of years. I mean, if that's truly where housekeepers and laundry were posted, and now we've changed that into nursing services rather than housekeeping, maybe that's the key to your dilemma with the nighttime housekeepers. I intend to work with Carmen and Chris on that and have a meeting all set up here shortly to look at that department.
I can add a little bit of information on that. The housekeeping, I believe the reason that might be down is because of previously we had our custodians were in-house staff, and now they're contracted staff that get billed out through Scott's team. So then those probably end up going into maintenance as part of a larger contracted for Scott's team versus out separately for our own people. Because our homemakers have always been part of the nursing department. That's who
Okay.
their supervisors are, as well as where they get billed.
Okay, we do have some excess there to work with if the board wants to consider any of that. The bottom line, when you go actual year to date, the 279,939, that's a cash number. We're ahead of the game with cash. The depreciation comes underneath that. It's not a cash item, the depreciation. That would be $247,000. And then on paper, with the depreciation, we would still be making $32,000 so far this year. But of course, some bills are a month behind, and so I'm calling it break even. And then we have COVID dollars that the expenses are embedded in, and the revenue is not. We expect that to be over $100,000. I didn't have a chance to update the May numbers, but that's well over $100,000 of COVID expenses that we can claim. So I think cash flow wise, we're looking pretty good again this year, like we did last year, with that COVID money offsetting. And then if you look at the cash flow and the depreciation in there, I think operations wise, we're doing okay. Any questions?
Buddy? Doesn't sound like it, Jane.
Thank you.
Thank you. If there are no other questions, on the vouchers or the financials, is there a motion to approve?
I'll second.
Uh-huh.
I'll move to approve.
Okay, Mike. Anybody second? Okay, Steve seconds. Is there any other discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor of approving the financials and vouchers, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Carried. Does anybody have anything else? I have one thing. We had mentioned maybe touring the neighbors sometime.
Yeah.
Do we want to do it in the summer, or spring, fall, winter?
Let me know when.
For some reason, my mind went to do it at Halloween and I'll dress up as death, but that's a bad
No, that-
idea.
That's
That's a bad
That's a
idea.
bad comment too. Anyway, what do you guys think? You wanna wait a couple months or a month or do it tomorrow or?
I can do it anytime. It doesn't matter to me. You're working hard and heavy now, or?
I just soon do it in the fall or actually the winter time. Would that be all right?
Yeah,
You
I
see
mean,
everything on the inside?
yeah, we can do multiple different groups too. If some
Oh,
people,
that's true.
we don't all have to come at once either. If you wanted to come out separately, that would work too.
Yeah, I've never seen the whole facility, so.
Yep.
I
Yeah,
think
I
it
don't know.
works better if we're in a group and we all hear the questions that we come up with, because everybody will have a different idea, but I may ask a question that these guys won't think of, but they'd like to hear that answer.
Sure.
Maybe November? Not during your season.
No. Maybe first part of December. How's that?
That works.
Would
for me
that
too.
work, guys? All right, we'll try to
Okay.
remember that. Carmen.
Okay.
All right, anybody have anything else at all?